6:37 morning to you. This is Breakfast with Stephen and Ellie.
Let's take a look at today's front pages. And in the Times, Rishi Sunak forges ahead in the Tory leadership race. That's their headline.
Meanwhile, The Observer says Boris Johnson's return would risk the party's death.
The Sunday Telegraph claims that Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak were urged to strike a deal to avert a Conservative civil war.
Sunday Mirror accuses the Conservatives of not being able to govern themselves.
And finally, the Daily Star leads with the claims of the rock star Brian Johnson, who says he was spooked by the ghost of a World War I soldier. Always rely on something different, can't we?
Honestly, I'm not sure who he is. Does anyone in the gallery know who he is? AC/DC. There you go.
You should know that.
It's not really my type of music, gotta be honest.
No.
There you go.
You can be forgiven.
Let's talk through the papers then with Deputy Editor of Spiked, Fraser Myers, and the anthropologist and filmmaker, Mariana Hotter. Oh, that's a new title.
I know, you guys make things up, so I'm just going with it. It's all good.
Are you not a filmmaker?
Yeah, I guess I am.
Yeah, well, there you go. We're not making it up then.
I'm a broadcaster, but they don't like broadcaster because everyone goes, what's that? I go, radio, podcast, writing.
You were on Time Team.
I was also on Time Team about 10 years ago.
Time
That's
Team?
correct.
I loved Time Team.
Who doesn't love
Time
Time Team?
That's very
You were
kind.
brilliant.
There
And
you
you're
go.
brilliant with
I
us
love
as well.
Time Team.
You're brilliant with us as well.
Let's have a look at the Sunday Times. Marianne,
Yes.
where it says the
Can you
Tory
guess what
right.
it's about?
But the Tory right is spurning Boris Johnson.
Well,
Claims.
apparently. So, for a moment, can we just remember the fact that Boris Johnson was flying back from holiday in the Caribbean? Why was he on holiday in the Caribbean? He should be at work. He's an MP. You know, the House of Commons is not in recession.
half of the
In
month.
recess, I mean.
Well, yes.
You know, there's clearly an absolute catastrophe happening in British politics, and he's on his jollies. Unacceptable. Oh, good of him to fly home to basically work out whether he can or can't make a fool of himself a second time around.
Oh.
And hopefully, he's working out that no, he can't, because even his own party don't want him back.
Well, you say that. It's got some big backers. Priti Patel came out yesterday, Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Rita
Wallace.
Belly. Some big names behind him.
They are quite in one particular camp of the party, aren't they? And I would imagine that those are the MPs who haven't been talking to their constituents. Lots of other big names are backing. So Kemi Badenoch came out to support Rishi Sunak. And the question is, of course, if Boris Johnson does not say that he's going to run, then the likelihood is that Rishi Sunak would probably be able to go forwards to just step into the role. Rather than there being a vote of either MPs or of Conservative Party members. So this piece is sort of suggesting that some contingents of the Tory party that you might automatically think would back Boris are actually thinking what would give us the best chance of party unity so that we're not in such catastrophic states in perhaps a couple of months' time.
Do you know what really strikes me? You said that
Boris is not tenable.
why aren't people listening to their constituents? Dennis, morning Dennis, says we want Boris back. Nobody is listening to the Red Wall voters. He's clearly in a Red Wall constituency. It's all opinions and nobody is listening. So people, you know...
Well, there are some people, of course. You know, you've got polls of the public. I think people were betting on whether Boris Johnson would come back, and Ladbrokes or William Hill slashed the odds, obviously by huge amounts. And I think it was the poll that I saw recently. I can't remember which paper it was this morning. 2/3. There you go. Okay, so 57% of people who voted for the Conservatives in 2019 believed it was the wrong move to get rid of Mr Johnson in the summer. 2/3 of them now believe he can make a political comeback, which is up from 43%. But that doesn't necessarily mean, you know, do you reckon Boris might be able to get back into politics is a different question. Do you think it's good for the country?
But, Marianne, I think what we do need to remember that it's the MPs and the ministers that got rid of Boris Johnson 6 weeks ago. It wasn't the people. Didn't go down to a public vote. And what we see, anyway, here in the inbox, and, I mean, you just need to take one look at the newspapers. He's the man at the moment. You know, he's making absolute buzz, not only in Westminster, but up and down the country.
But this isn't a popularity contest. This isn't about Narcissism Weekly. This is about what is best for the 70-odd million.
No, but that argument that he has a mandate from the 2019 election, does that not ring true in what we see?
I don't think so, because this whole idea that he's got a mandate, no one in 2019, yes, he's very charismatic, yes, he was carrying a campaign in a way that other politicians haven't in recent memory, but you're not voting for a Prime Minister, you're voting for your MP. So the idea that one particular Prime Minister has a mandate from a general election is fundamentally not how British democracy works.
No, I think he does have that on his side. I think that's one of the few things in his favour, so to speak. Because it's not just about Boris the person, it's about the kind of vision he sort of had for the country. And that's why Trussonomics was such a disaster, because it tried to go back, on trying to appeal to the sort of red wall constituencies. But, let's take a step back and think, how have we got here? It's testament to the absolute disaster of Truss's premiership, testament to the total disarray of the Conservative Party that we're even considering putting someone back in who was, essentially every minister of his resigned on him only 3 months ago. He had a worse kind of, more MPs voted no confidence in his leadership than in Theresa May. So it's not looking good.
No, well,
he's under parliamentary investigation.
And he could be out of his seat in December.
That's
he
the
could have to
problem.
step down because of lying to the
Allegedly.
House of Commons. Well, that's what he's being investigated.
Allegedly.
But as Priti Patel said yesterday when she endorsed Boris Johnson, she said on the big things, so getting jabs into people's arms, in Ukraine, with Brexit, Boris makes the right calls, and the big decision, he gets it right. What do you say to that?
I don't know that he has got some decisions right. Certainly Brexit and Ukraine. I don't agree with him on COVID. The vaccine rollout was very impressive though. But I think you've just got to remember, that he, by the end of his kind of time in office, he was just unable to govern. He was not able to implement his programme, and you could say that
have a programme.
And you could say that that's someone else's fault. We can talk about how maybe the media sort of whipped up a lot of that, but it just was not functioning, and it had to, and that's why he ended up having to go.
We're talking about him coming back into number 10. Is he even going to get through? To the sort of the first round of all this? The Sunday Mirror, Fraser, says that he hasn't actually got 100 MP support.
Which
is the minimum. That's the line he's got to cross.
He could be making it up. It could be a classic sort of Johnsonian wheeze to get some attention and draw in more support. And people have rightly asked, well, if he's got these 100 MPs backing him, if he's already over the threshold, why does he need to be meeting with Rishi Sunak? Why does he need to cut a deal with him? Because, it seems pretty obvious that if a vote went to the members between Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson, I think the members would back Boris. So, why does he need to do these shenanigans if he's already ahead?
Mary, the front page of The Sun, and it's also in The Telegraph, Sunak and Johnson meet to discuss their future, their urge to strike a deal. How do you think that conversation went?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because the only person who's officially declared that they're running for the leadership is Penny Mordaunt. And we were talking off camera, why is the conversation not around perhaps Rishi Sunak and Penny Mordaunt sort of effectively going into coalition, that she said, actually, I'm going to throw my lot in with you and I'm going to back you, Sunak, and kind of bolster a kind of an opposition, perhaps potentially, therefore discouraging Boris Johnson from even saying that he's going to sort of stand.
Well...
But it's actually about them meeting. Now, what are they going to meet to discuss? They're not going to go back into work as Prime Minister and Chancellor again, are they?
Well, probably. Let me grab this, because I tell you what was interesting. This is all to do with Ben Wallace, right? Now, make of this what you will. Ben Wallace has backed Boris Johnson. But he also said, he's the one who's also saying he wants to see a triumvirate between Boris Johnson, Rishi Sunak and Penny Mordaunt. So, but he's also, in this article apparently, he's called on Sunak to talk to his rivals and offer them senior roles in the cabinet. So he's backed Johnson, but seems to be implying he thinks Rishi's going to win.
That's because Ben Wallace isn't an idiot.
Well, if that's the case, why didn't he back Rishi Sunak?
The question is,
But also, is it implying that Boris Johnson is actually happy to take a senior cabinet role?
Boris Johnson doesn't want a senior cabinet role. He doesn't even want to be an MP. He just wants to be Team Boris, to do Borisy things. So he's gonna, I think, probably, at whatever point he next can, with all his narcissistic kind of credentials intact, step away from politics and just go and make lots of money buffooning his way around the world, getting paid lots and lots of money to...
Well, it's just it's a really interesting quote, though, isn't it?
Yeah. Power.
I think the suggestion is that he could be made foreign secretary again, or that he could have some kind of Ukraine-facing role.
Would he do that though, Fraser?
I don't know. You know, I don't know. I don't think anyone can see inside Boris's head.
It does make you
No one needs him. We do not need to pay him a salary to be a buffoon and make a...
No, but don't forget that...
A literal liability on an international stage. We are in dire straits enough. The world is laughing at us.
Well,
we don't need Boris Johnson to be our spokesperson.
I'm getting the distinct impression you're not a fan.
Not a fan.
Well, it's interesting. The official Ukrainian Twitter account said it's time for Boris to come back.
And then immediately deleted it when someone pointed out all the ways that Boris Johnson's international statements and policies had undermined the credibility and the sovereignty of Ukraine for 8 years prior because of his relationships and backing of Putin. But it's funny that was pointed out and they went, oh yeah, probably should delete that because it's not as simple as we thought.
Let's just very quickly finish on something entirely different. Please. In the Mail on Sunday, Fraser, looking at Diana, Princess of Wales, and her funeral on The Crown.
So this is set to be the most controversial series of The Crown yet, not least because it's in probably living memory for the largest share of the audience so far. So they're going to recreate the funeral of Princess Diana. The Mail is very upset about this, saying it's distasteful and disrespectful. I disagree. I mean, it was a real historical event. It would be a bit strange to cover that part of...
If it was a documentary, I'd agree, but they're dramatising the funeral of the heir to the throne.
Well, what's interesting is that
the mother of the heir to the throne.
Normally, the criticism of The Crown is exactly as you say. It's fictionalised, it's dramatised, but this is and they actually, in order to get the story moving, they do make up events. That didn't happen. But this clearly is something that happened. It's something.
Except the funeral happened, but within that, they're not going to just show us what we saw on telly at the time, are they? They're going to add dialogue.
There will be some additional spicy drama, I'm sure. But it would be a bit strange. It'd be like telling the story of Tony Blair without mentioning Iraq or something like that. I don't think it's such a huge event that I don't think it could really be passed over.
It's distasteful, just briefly.
Yeah, I do. I think it's really tricky because you're right. People are going to... The scriptwriter's going to put words into people's mouths, and it's really hard to watch those things and try and tease out the things that we definitely know really happened and the things that they've just dramatised amazingly well with actors who look just like the people. I feel bad for the princes, is the truth.
It must be hard for them to watch.
Because they're still rightly traumatised by the whole thing, and it just seems a bit,
It is difficult, isn't it? When it's about people that are no longer with us. People that have passed on, and to watch it like that is... Some would say distasteful.
It just doesn't sit right with me. I know loads of you love The Crown. I would say
though, it's quite obvious to people that it is a drama. I think so.
I mean,
I don't think
it's actors. But you know the actors. You know they're actors.
Yeah, but they still get messages as if they're the characters. Well, I remember. People would stop Ross Kemp on the street and Phil Mitchell.
Yeah.
Or Graham Mitchell, you did that, and he's like, I'm not really Graham Mitchell. He doesn't really exist.
Yeah. Well, it was a bit like, as David Mellor said to us on Friday, everyone, Richard III was this horrible, horrible man, horrible king, except we know he wasn't. It's just that's the way he was dramatised by Shakespeare.
Yeah.
That's what we all believe it.
Attitudes about disability.
Yeah. So, let us know what you think. gbnews.uk. I've got to stop doing that, holding my hands up
let us know what you think.
In despair. Thank you both. We shall catch up with you a little bit later on.
Thank you.